Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on our Tech Development Demystified webinar. Seems like we've got about over 100 registrations, so that's good. A lot of interest in this topic. This is going to be a two-part series, just FYI. So we're going to take everyone from path of ideation through to production, but we're going to do the first half of that today. And I won't give away up to what stage we're going to do because we have a little quick, I think, poll about that Damon's going to share about what stage that means. But I'm Chris Howard, the founder and CEO of Softeq, and with me today is Phu Nguyen, our product solutions manager. And I worked with Phu on many projects over the years, too many to count right now. In the past, when he was a client, uh, and we were developing product for Disney. So we have a lot of lessons learned here to share with you today. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. The webinar is going to cover the critical journey from tech idea to production. All right. So like I said, this is part one. Part two will be on April 22nd. So please sign up for that as well. Should be registration links out there. Maybe we'll drop one in the chat if we have it. This process is crucial for reducing risks and ensuring successful development of both software and hardware products, because many tech projects fail due to poor planning, not because of the tech. One of the hardest things I had to overcome in one of the projects I did earlier was not the tech, it was getting the client to pay on time. So it was all about the money and the mechanics. So in this presentation, we're going to provide actionable steps to avoid some of those common pitfalls and set your innovation path on a path of success. So without much ado, let's go to our next slide. So this is the journey through tech development. Um, First stage is ideation, right? Generating an idea. And a lot of people think this is the most important stage, but frankly, the old adage of ideas are a dime a dozen is mostly true, right? And maybe Fu, I should have you say hi at least before we get too far into this.
Hi, this is Fu. Chris and I go way back, and our journey started at Disney. And Chris is right. The idea takes 1%, and 99% of that is making that idea work. So you have a great idea, and those come very hard. But the other 99% is really, really hard also.
Yeah, getting it done. Also, one other note about the webinar, we will have a Q&A at the end. You'll see an icon over on the right with a question mark. Go ahead and click that and ask your question. And then the other members in the audience can upvote those questions. And the ones with the most upvotes are the ones that we'll answer first as we have time. If we run out of time, we'll follow up with an email and answer the remaining questions. So ideation is the first one, generating ideas. And we'll talk a little bit later in the webinar about sometimes how you have to get together to generate that idea, right? You might not always have it. Once you have the idea, then it's how do you protect it, right? So understanding NDAs and intellectual property concerns and things like that. And then we'll talk about POC development. I don't know if we have that poll on POC live yet, Damon, do we? I don't hear Damon,
Yes,
but
it's live.
yeah, so there's another icon over on the right. Looks like a little couple bars. That's our poll. If you click on the polls, answer the question of what you think a POC stands for, right? Um, Whether it's point of contact or proof of concept, painted on the ceiling, okay, or piece of crud. Sometimes you do end up with a piece of crud. We're going to help you avoid that. And then the last step is validation. So once you have a proof of concept, how do you validate and collect the data and get feedback in order to support the potential of that project? Okay. So the ideation phase. How do you get past that? Well, there's a couple of ways into that. Sometimes you already have that idea, right? But if you have an idea, you still need to do things like conducting customer interviews and identifying pain points and kind of validating whether that idea that you have is something that's useful to the customer. The other one is like a brainstorming session with just your own team, for example, generate ideas, getting together in a room. How can we come solve a particular problem? What other customer needs can we solve? And sometimes you need help with that, right? So one of the things that we offer at Softeq is an innovation lab. That's where we get in the room with you to help you generate ideas, because from our background, we know we have a broad experience of working with many companies over the last 28 plus years, right? Softeq's been around for 3 decades. We've been doing product development for the Fortune 500, innovative entrepreneurs at companies like Disney, like we mentioned, Epson, Verizon, etc. Will come to us with an idea and they need help to implement that. And then also innovative entrepreneurs that have ideas and need help, realizing those hardware and software products. But sometimes you're not sure what's capable, what's possible with the technology of today, right? So getting in a room with an innovation lab, with a tech provider that understands what's available with the technology of today, that could be leveraged for your product or service. AI is a popular topic right now. How can you apply AI to your software and hardware? It might be, how do we, what if we use augmented reality to help you see more clearly in the water while you're fishing? Or how do we use computer vision to prevent shoplifting or things like that? Or if you say, hey, I want you to build a time machine, we'll say, well, we're working on that, but we're still a little bit, ways away from having that be a possibility, because the tech may not be there yet in order to implement your idea. So having an innovation lab is like a brainstorming session on steroids. And then once some of those ideas are picked, they can be fleshed out a little bit more, and maybe even a proof of concept made. And then the last stage is a discovery phase. And the discovery phase is, well, you have the idea, but you have no clue on how to implement it, right? You understand how mobile and software works, but you don't know how to create a mobile app. You don't know how much that costs. You don't know what the first step is. How do you get it quoted? And the discovery phase is something that we help with, where we interview you and your requirements or your idea, and then ask you all those questions of you know what your budget is, or um, what the battery life needs to be, what's the size of the device need to be, what's the what kind of technology are we going to leverage to implement that, what would be in a proof of concept or version 1 or even a version 0.5 of the product to prove out the idea, right? And so that's another area, an important step that you can do before you're spending 50, 100, or hundreds of thousands of dollars on something that might not quite work yet. But the discovery phase, the output of a discovery phase, working with the business analysts and the solution architects, is a document that documents, what the requirements are for that product, so that a company can take that and then quote it once they understand what the requirements are. At large enterprises, what they often have is what's called a marketing requirements document, or an MRD. This is usually put together by the marketing team with their wish list and dream of, if you build this product, I can sell it. And then the engineering team then creates what's called a product requirements document, which essentially translates those dreams of the marketing department into like a real world. Well, this is what we can actually build. And then you compare the two and get marketing on board with, well, if this is what we can build, can you still sell it, right? And each client is different, so some clients come to us from just the idea stage without any document. Some clients, large enterprises, they'll come with a document that has a very detailed requirement. They don't need the discovery phase. They've already gone through it. And Phu, for example, and when we did a project for him, it was like the document was so complete. I think the most complete I've ever seen. Uh, Requirement 1.2.4.8.10, the product needs to do this, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit more about uh, validating that in a minute. We'll get some comments from Phu. One quick question on NDAs. This comes up a lot. We do sign a lot of NDAs at Softeq. happy to sign. They're not always necessary, right? Because you can talk to someone and not disclose something that's confidential and get a lot of work done, right? So um, they don't always have. You don't always have to have one. The other thing about NDAs is they are limited. I mean, the idea, like we said before, often doesn't have any value without execution, right? You can tell me you've got a great idea to create a connected dog collar that's got all the bells and whistles and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and geofencing and all that stuff. Hey, great. Well, guess what? I don't have the time or background or money to go build that product and steal it from you, right? And so the protection of your idea usually is your own background and also the execution of the idea. So moving on to the next one. Yeah, and like I said, are people really out there to steal your idea? The reality is not really. I mean, it's really quite rare. Over 3 decades, I've never had a problem with the NDAs that we've signed. So there's some protection there, but like Fu said earlier, it's about the execution, and that's really the differentiator between success and failure. So don't get too caught up. In fact, investors, if you're looking for investment money, if you're in that top 3% of startup that can actually raise capital, because you're going to 100x those investors' money, they don't sign NDAs because they're getting pitched ideas every single day, right? And they can't, they can't sign an NDA on a dog collar and then get sued later because the next guy pitched a dog collar, right? That maybe had a different set of features. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about proof of concept, and we'll get Fu involved here a little bit.
Yeah.
Fu, I think you've got a few proof of concepts, so let's take a look at some of those. POC is proof of concept, by the way, not piece of crud. Although they are works like units, so they sometimes look like garbage, right? So we'll maybe show a few of those.
They do, because one of our things was we wanted to provide a certain messaging to guests at Disney. And the first proof of concept was way back when, um, you know, Compaq has something called, yeah, one of their PDAs, black and white, and
First
they'll
model,
package
yeah.
it. But what was missing was the wireless system. So we created a dongle that's pretty inexpensive to plug into to interact with it. So part of the being proof of concept is how can we do it cheaply and until verified our idea. So by making a product out that's already working, modifying that, getting back into the software development and things like that, and being able to access the technology there, an existing technology to prove your concept before you go all out invest into some type of new product. So this little device helped us to say, hey, it does work. Our system does integrate to it. Then it moved to the bigger, bulky one. So that lasted maybe a few months. And then said, hey, can we make that and really do a case study with customers and then move to really bigger, bulkier. This was before ruggedized became ruggedized. So it's kind of a precursor to
And
all
the
your,
idea was to take an existing iPad
yep.
handheld that had 95% of what you needed, put it in a case, but then add that dongle to do the infrared or the Disney magic in order to see, can you sense IR signals and trigger them and play content. But you didn't need to create the whole platform, right?
And part of it was we had to increase battery life. Like as you mentioned, the thinner one, sleeker one lasted a few hours. The bigger one lasted almost a whole day. So we say, okay, one of the requirements we finally rolled this out is better power management, better battery life, and even exchangeable battery potentially also. So it got thicker, but we were able to run that and say, okay, here's the learnings from it, and to go to our final device.
And it worked around the park, and I have one that was here.
Mhm.
So obviously, though, wearing this around your neck is not the best user experience, but for testing, for proof of concept, being able to take this around the park and have it last all day and get the infrared and play the content or show the content proves out the concept so that you could then bring in a partner like Softeq to come and say, okay, we know what we want, we know it works. This is not, what we want our guests to be wearing, and so show how it and turned out into well, we didn't know, by the way, we didn't know what to do. In fact, I even prototyped this here. This is a piece of clay I molded with my old hands, and I'm like, oh well, maybe it's a rubberized puck that you clip on your belt, and then you've got a headset that you wear. Of course, this was durable because you could drop it. Theme parks are shredders for technology because they've got sun and rain and humidity and guests dropping it all day long and stuff like that. But then you also got like headsets, that could choke people and very awkward. So this was one concept. But then in the end, it's like, well, what should it look like? And I think for you have one there. I think I have one myself. But
Yeah.
first generation was
Well,
went from this handheld to a headset.
yep.
So
So that's
and
why the reason it's looking like this because we do not want the guest to take the device home as a souvenir. There were much more elegant design when those are going to be walking out of the park. So let's
well, it was other requirements, and we can talk about that in a minute. But the uh, that was, yeah. Could you make it smaller and sleeker? Well, yes, but then it might break more often. Also, guests might steal it. Things like this. So anyway, feasibility is the purpose of a proof of concept. Risk reduction, validating those assumptions to save time and money by not going to the headset and then figuring out, well, the IR really doesn't work in the park all that well in order for this to trigger. And now we have 5,000 headsets that don't really work. And then it wasn't the case in Disney, but you might need investor attraction. You can show a proof of concept to investor. This thing works. The technology is built. Everything's solved. We just need X amount of money in order to produce the product now. Make it sexy, make it cool, get it into production. So it's not a finished product. Sometimes we call them Frankensteins. They're works like units, not works like looks like units. And so we even did prototype the headset before we went to tooling with silicon molds and something that the Disney team could put in their head and wear, because one of those requirements was it needs to fit everybody from children on up to adults, right? Another requirement is something like it needs to survive a 4-foot drop test, things like that. So some differences between software and hardware. It's not all hardware, right? There are software proof of concepts. You don't have to spend $50,000 or $100,000 creating an app and then figuring out whether the client really wants that app or not. You can do a prototype, a simulation, a clickable prototype using the UI and UX schemes that are out there now to test whether a user finds something useful. So it's basic functionality testing, also user interface validation. Do people understand how to use it before you go off and spend a lot of money on creating a mobile app, on iOS and Android. The hardware POC, as we said, is really just to test core assumptions. Those prototype the headset we made first as a prototype, wouldn't survive a drop test. I did a prototype of the next generation, which was this Duratec handheld, which was also was another product for Disney, but the first one cost me like $5,000, to do the handheld. I even screwed it together. I think I was putting it together in a hotel room at CES at one point, to shop it around at other companies. And I was so worried when I was talking about how it was a rugged handheld that someone would try to test it and drop it and it would sprawling into a gazillion pieces. But I had this $5,000 or $10,000 prototype, and I would hand it over to someone, and as they're talking, they're like waving it around and gesticulating, and I'm like, please don't drop that thing. But anyway, so physical functionality testing, doing things like here, it needed to have like assistive raise buttons that a blind person could feel, and so testing things out like that before you make a bunch of those.
and you can see the size
All right.
difference between the big red brick
Oh
and
yeah.
that one.
Yeah, so you got this, and then you got done this. This is actually more than 15 years old, and I think it still looks pretty cool. I mean, back in this day, the rugged handhelds were simple devices that were big and bulky. We had these, and we even did, if we're talking about prototypes, um, here's one that I did back in the day. It was actually a 3D printed. This is actually printed with colored sand because we were pitching a company there you might be familiar with. Hey, what if we did this in like Starbucks green, and you use these at Starbucks to do line busting and have the barista come out from behind the counter and take an order so that clients coming into the store wouldn't then just turn around and leave because the line was too long. Like, get their order, have them stand and wait. You might need something like this. And I think Chick-fil-A does this really well now, right? they've got their mobile devices out in the drive lanes taking your order. You see that line, you see a Chick-fil-A line though, this is going to take me 3 minutes to get through. You see that line at a Burger King, you're like, that's a 30-minute line. A few comments on software POCs. It's just really, again, a matter of defining the functionality, creating that clickable prototype, testing with some targeting users, and then refining that based on feedback that you get and iterating. So before you spend a big wad of cash on a mobile app, you can do a lot with the tools today, much more than you could, 15 years ago. Hardware, same thing, and just a different process. But researching the problem, Disney understood the problem very well, building those prototypes with off-the-shelf parts, taking an iPack. Even the Duratec here that we built when we created this was actually an iPack inside. But what we did, we thought, well, we don't want to create the 90% of all that that's already been certified and working. We took iPacks, disassembled them, and created a ruggedized case, and then added a few daughter boards inside of this to provide the features we needed, like infrared or amplified audio or FM tuning. So we had a daughter board in here that interfaced with the rest of it, and then we figured out how to patch the keyboard in, and that saved a lot of time and effort. The headset itself, again, this headset was, even though it's got the Disney magic of infrared in there, which was patented, by the way, the guts inside is an MP3 player. So it came down to basically being able to solve the problem of getting the infrared transmission and then being able to play the audio fast enough so that it could be synchronized with rides and shows, right?
Yeah, one of the difficult part about, hardware is that the user interface is mobile. On a software, you can put it on a desktop and try those. On a hardware, the user interface and the software connectivity is more difficult because that iPack that you have, the screen smaller. How do we make it so that you can actually carry that around for you for proof of concept? So that becomes more difficult, and it should be, everything should be intuitive. So that's where we can look at it that says, we want to make it look close as possible to working, but sometimes for a hardware point, proof of concept, it's a little tougher because you can't get that down to size and hand it over to someone. You don't want to be generating $10,000 devices and then and go do proof of concept or user interface and feedback, right? Because that becomes really hard to do. But so when you want to do proof of concept hardware, think what your strategy is and how to get it out there and get the guests to use it or your customer to use it to give you good feedback without having to build the actual device right away.
To get you that version 1, right? Because you don't want to build version 3. The other thing about building on existing platforms is time to market. So, for example, the headset, once we got the green light and we started the development, we delivered 5,000 headsets, and I think something like 120 unit lithium battery chargers with all the certifications, with all the tooling, with all the production into their hands, start to finish, in 6 months, right? And you wouldn't have been able to do that if you started from scratch and you're laying out PCB boards and stuff. That included things like on-body testing because they didn't want to give their guests brain cancer for some reason. So you got to test it, make sure it doesn't have radiation. You got to test it, to make sure it doesn't have drop. It survives a 4-foot drop. You need to do UCC and UL and FCC and all that kind of testing. So moving along here, because I think we're running a little long. Collecting evidence, validating your idea. We talked a little bit about this before. Having those clear success metrics, right? So that's what that discovery phase in that document needs to include. Is like, it needs to survive a 4-foot drop. It needs to be, IP67 or whatever the rating is. It needs to have an all-day park battery life. It needs to have, XYZ, right? What are the features that it needs to have that would be, achieve a successful delivery.
So as an owner,
and then depending, go ahead.
As an owner, it's very critical that you spend your early stages having those requirements and understanding how to test at the end. Because as a vendor, we say, hey, this is what you need to do. But if you don't have it in writing and have those stepped out for you, how do you check it out? So as part of your quality program, it's us working with you saying, hey, these are great specifications. How do you want to test it to say we've achieved what you're looking for? So it's very critical that you write those down, say this is our testing, and how to perform those tests so that you do get the product that's developed for you.
That's exactly right. Good story that I heard also, real world example. This was a software product, but when Airbnb just got started, and they had some traction, and they were talking to their investor, and he's like, "Well, where's your largest concentration of clients?" And at this time, they were in Silicon Valley, right? And so they said, "Well, actually, we have quite a few users in New York City." And the investor said, "Well, what are you doing here? Get out to New York and go talk to those clients." And so what they did was they actually had a system. They also noticed that a lot of their Airbnb hosts didn't have like photo skills and that kind of thing. They didn't have photographs of their places, so they offered to take photos if they would meet with them. And they didn't realize it was the two founders that were there with doing the photography, but they gained a lot of insight of what their pain points are, what they were looking for, what they liked about the platform, what they didn't like. So that's part of that validation loop. I'm sure Airbnb app version 1 looks very different than it does today. I'm not going to go in huge detail here. This webinar will be recorded, and you'll have access to that. So you can go back, maybe lead a little bit more. We talked a lot, about this, but essentially, you do have to look at the functionality, the user experience, the performance, and then the scalability, right? And those vary slightly between software and hardware validations. Like scalability, can it handle multiple users? In hardware, that's going to be manufactured at scale. Is it designed for manufacturability? And that's why you want to have an experienced partner that knows how to build a product. But use that data to go from your proof of concept and iterate and refine the idea so that you can go into production. Some common mistakes, right? So, a lot of wasted resources if you spend time and money on unvalidated ideas. In the example that we gave earlier, maybe you would have gone to this with production and people would hate it, right? You didn't actually try it. And then you'd have a bunch of devices nobody wanted to use, right? Unvalidated assumptions. You have an assumption this is something that's going to work or something that somebody's going to like, but test it out on a limited number of users so that you can get some feedback. You'd be surprised at what you can learn. And then market misalignment. So creating products users don't want. This is the common thing, is that people create a product because they think it's cool. I can do it, right? But nobody really wants it. Steve Jobs has a lot of opinion about this kind of thing. Just creating technology for technology's sake instead of using technology to solve the problem. So don't jump straight into development without testing the idea. It's one of the most common and costly mistakes you can make in tech development. I don't know if that ever happened to you, Fu, where you skip those
No, not
parts,
really.
but
There's a lot of testing going on where I worked,
yeah,
and a lot of
yeah,
it we put back on the shelf until either the technology comes around, or always is there a market for it. So yeah, there's a lot of testing going on before we basically say go.
hmm and there's a lot of things that can kill products, even though the tech works just fine. You know, um, uh, I think Disney had a My Pal Mickey doll that was a really cool talking, pal that you could take all around the theme parks, and it would talk about the different locations, and it would talk about whether a parade was coming and everything. But the challenge there was just trying to get it stocked even in internal stores, because it was more expensive than a Mufasa doll, something like that. You could make more margin selling a non-technical product. So it's always interesting to me when kind of the non-technology kill a product. Some other common mistakes: overestimating the market size, right? It's like, well, you thought there was a big market, but then there really wasn't. I had a graphics toolkit company in the DOS days, and it turned out, this was many, many years ago, 40 years ago, but we were the number one graphics toolkit vendor, but our revenue was 1.5 million a year. Yeah, it wasn't a big enough total addressable market in order to, support that, scale. Poorly defined success criteria, like Fu said, not having that list of success. What is it we're trying to achieve with this product? What's the definition of success? Not just what the feature list is, right? It's kind of maybe the more somewhat boring part to work on that, but you really need to think about that ahead of time, especially whatever vendor you select. You want to know, like, what does success look like with this product? And then last one on this slide is just try not, don't try to do it all alone. Don't go full Mandalorian, right? Unless you are the Mandalorian, I think he probably can take care of himself. But choose experienced partners that have gone through the process before. Like how do you select a contract manufacturer? Do you own your firmware, right? Do you know where your firmware is? Who has access to it? Do you know what your source code is? How do you do defect tracking? Um, you know, can you design a product for manufacturability? All of those things. You want to pick someone that has gone through the whole thing before, um, and you know, don't try to do it on your own. That's my recommendation. Something for our big enterprise clients. I thought these statistics were interesting, right? If you don't plan beyond the development, there's a 67% project failure rate, right? And an additional delay. And your ROI triples if you actually plan for this from the beginning. And so that means is you've developed the product, maybe you even got the budget, but then once it's developed, is the product socialized well enough within the organization that the sales team knows how to sell it? Do they have the channels to sell it? Maybe it's different enough that they don't have the same clientele or ways of approaching someone. Maybe this solution is something that gets installed at airports and public places, but that your client before was maybe more consumer oriented, or they were enterprise, but you're selling a different type of product. Your sales team doesn't know how to sell it and they don't get commission for it. And so, the product's dead on arrival, for example. Or, how is that inventory going to be funded? Now you've built the product and you need to buy 5,000, 10,000 units. Well, that's expensive, right? And it needs to be stocked somewhere. And there are creative ways of doing that. There's a lot of on-demand manufacturing and partners now too. So, but definitely keep that in mind. If you're in an enterprise, you need to socialize it up the chain. Like, hey, once this product is successful, what happens after that? Seems common sense now, but whatever. Um, all right, so getting up to our last slide here, POC to production, what's next? So obviously going from ideation to proof of concept, it's important, right? Generating those ideas, protecting them, understanding them, getting your POCs out there, collecting that evidence, validating, avoiding those mistakes. These are all the steps you need to apply to your own tech projects, and with careful planning will lead to successful outcomes, right? And in part two of this, once you have that POC, which is in Phu's case, it was the something like this proof of concept, or you have something like this that might look ugly, like a circuit, right? That you just put on a breadboard. Once you have it and it works, now how do you manufacture it, right? How do you go from that idea to get it into something that looks like the headset, or something that looks more like a production device. This is actually version 4 of this, right? So if you can imagine, there was version 1, 2, and 3 of this that looked much bigger and bulkier. And you don't want to develop version 4 when you can develop version 1. So in our second part, we will cover taking your POC to an MVP, which is a minimal viable product, and into production. And there are steps there to do as well. We had a couple other polls. I guess I didn't shout them out if you saw there in the poll list. So if you haven't answered those yet, please do. And then I think it's time for our Q&A. Well, one shameless plug about my podcast. I have a Forge in the Future podcast. If you're interested in tech and software, I do interview some of the movers and shakers in the tech space. I had Rod Canyon, the founder and CEO of Compaq, on. We talked about the Compaq iPad. Or guys like Steve Altimus, who landed us on the moon for the first time in 50 years. So the last episode that just came out was about humanoid robotics. So check it out, subscribe. Let me know what you think. And now we have our Q&A. So thank you for listening to all of this. We're excited to collaborate with any of you that need to have your innovative ideas brought to life. Reach out to us for that. We're also happy to answer your questions now. And it looks like we've got a few of them. If you don't have a question, but you want to go ahead and upvote the ones that are there too, so we get the ones up at the top. So what's the average length of time for a discovery phase to get to a POC? Well, it can vary depending on the complexity of the product, right? So a discovery phase, can take 1 to 3 months. I mean, don't you think, Phu? Something around those, that time frame if you're doing an ideation phase, and then once you have that specification, taking it to a proof of concept, again, really varies between software and hardware, right? One concept I like to use is the car analogy, right? People will come to us and say, I have this idea, how much is it going to cost? Or I want to create a mobile app, what's the app going to cost? The challenge is we don't know what kind of car you want, right? And that's what the discovery phase helps us to figure out. Do you need 2 people? Do you like convertibles? Do you need, to seat 10 people? Does it need to go fast? Are you looking for a Kia or a Honda or a Nissan or a Lamborghini, right? You want vinyl interior or a hand burled wood dash, right? So all those things um, um, can factor in. Now, for proof of concept, you can just get the 4 wheels out there,
So some
but
of the discovery phase also is how ingrained are you in your idea? Do you have a concept or have you worked through your idea already? So those are the kind of
mm-hmm,
questions we ask ourselves. Hey, this is my idea. And you go, have you thought about this, 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 and this? And you go, oh, well, not yet. And that's what part of the discovery phase is to really drill down to what your core idea is and say, okay, once you have
mm-hmm,
that core idea, okay, now how do we do proof of concept? But if you have just an idea, like I said, 1% inspiration, the discovery is the 99% perspiration part. So great
mm-hmm,
idea. How do we drill it down to make sure that all the high points where you want to get to is in there? So if you have this great idea and it's very quick and simple, a month. If you have this complex item need to drill some more, we would go back and forth and kind of say, hey, and part of that also say, hey, is there something out there like that right now? Is there technology out there right now? Do you have to work around that, or how similar or different is your to what's existing? Um,
mm-hmm.
so that's where
Yeah, can you leverage off the shelf technology to get your proof of concept done? I think the idea is you do want to get it into the hands of people as fast as you can without spending a lot of time on the proof of concept, right?
yep.
You just want to identify what are the things you're trying to prove and then focus on those and get those features into the software or hardware and implement it. And so you don't want to spend a year on a POC. That's the whole point of a POC. You want to spend a month to 3 months kind of developing it and testing it and iterating it, and from there. So good question. So let me finish answering that. Done answering. Next one. What are the top factors to look for in a technology development partner? Well, that's a good one. Um, of course, have they done it before? Are they familiar with the space? Do they understand hardware? Right. Even if you need a mobile app or a software app, sometimes if it interfaces with hardware, oftentimes you need a supplier that understands hardware, right? So maybe you only need a mobile app for your dog collar, but if you don't understand how Bluetooth works on that collar and how to do firmware updates and how to do Wi-Fi and how to do GPS and how to do a lot of things, um, you know, there's a lot of mobile apps that don't need to do that. How do you communicate from your mobile phone app to your particular um, app that your dog that's one of a million dog collars, right? That's not something normally like a mobile app developer would have to solve. And of course, if it's hardware, have they ever gotten something manufactured? Have they taken to contract manufacturing? Maybe if you might have an idea, like when we were working with you, what were you looking for?
Well, part of that was you came with a very reputable company. You were introduced us by HP at that time, and it was very good that you had that relationship with HP. So, having introduction with a previous client or a reputable company always helps. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
new at, so I'm not hiring a new company is not a bad thing, but you still see what
Mm-hmm.
their legacy and what their history is and who is vouching for them. It's always good. Uh,
Yeah.
so Chris, HP vouches for Softeq. We went, okay, that would make sense, you
Yeah.
know. So at that point, when we trust Softeq as we would trust HP. Uh,
Yeah.
so in that sense, I
Yeah, it
think
did help having an HP on the left, and then of course we did future projects on and on after that, after earning your trust.
mhm.
But yeah,
But
if you don't have that, it's like, well, have you done medical devices before? Have you done pet tech before? Have you done, some of these other, what have they done before and who have they worked with? So have they developed products for well-known companies? And have they worked with startups before? You know.
Yeah. So it might not be the company, but maybe the people you're working with and see what their CV looks like. Hey, this is someone we hired this on, or they started their own company, but look at who they worked for before they came out to this. HP, Lenovo, Intel. You're like, okay, that's very reputable, and see how that match up with what your ideal is. Is it hardware? Is it
Mm-hmm.
software? So you want to make sure, and of course, the people you work with too. If you meet them and they're not personal, they don't explain things to you, they talk about, you're like, wait a minute, I'm trying to how to use technology. You have to explain to me so I can understand what I'm getting. Part of that is that,
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say this, but that technical language barrier. We talk to you in bits and
Mm-hmm.
bytes. You're like, no, no, no. What do I do when I push a button? What happens? So that's
Mm-hmm.
where that technology barrier needs to be just not be there when you're dealing with a consultant.
Well, and then also you want a collaborative partner, right? That
Mhm.
can actually suggest and problem solve, and is good at innovation, which often hasn't been done before. And this is something new, and you're in new territory, and you need to address it. All right, we have a few more questions here. Are you better off not outsourcing from a VC funding perspective? In my personal opinion, I feel that especially when you're getting a company and a product off the ground, you should leverage the team of a partner, right? Someone that has worldwide resources that can leverage the lower cost that's available out there, but not just that. You know, um, for example, when we put companies through our venture studio, we give them the funding, we put them through a studio, but we're pairing them with our hundreds of engineers worldwide that have been building product for the Fortune 500 for 3 decades. That's the idea of how to de-risk it. But then you don't have to hire a .NET guy or a Java guy or a hardware guy and pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars and give them a bunch of equity in your business because Google wants to pay that guy 300,000 a year for doing Java development, and you don't really have a business yet, right? Or maybe you only need a BA for a month, or a solution architect for a month or two, or you need additional QA where you'll ramp from 2 people to 5 people, and so in the beginning you want to get it, it's almost like proof of concept stage. You want to leverage a partner that can get that done and has these larger pool of resources to pull from as needed. And that's going to be a lot cheaper than trying to go off and hire engineers and build the team internally. I get your question, Joe, is about, well, will VC fund you if you don't have the experience in house? What we're seeing is that 9 out of 10 companies used to have a CTO as a co founder. Now, 9 out of 10 don't because the founders understand the mobile technology and the hardware and what they want, but they don't have the CTO. So, having a partner like Softeq, we come in as that CTO, and we've had companies scale. Like the Halo Collar company came to us with an idea. They're the one that I showed, but they got the #1 dog collar on the market now. When we started working with them, they were at like a $15 million valuation. They went on to raise at $100 million valuation. They're doing 100 million plus in revenue per year now, and they're not under any pressure from VCs to say, "Hey, get rid of your development team." So my little bit biased because I could see this is how I feel that companies should go about it. But why cobble together a team of your own that's never shipped a product before when you're trying to get off the ground instead of leveraging someone that has experience in doing that? That would be my recommendation. All right. We can answer a few more if people want to hang around for it. Does development delay affects the results of the POC? Does development delay affect the result of the POC?
Well, your proof of concept is when you want to test that core idea. If you keep on, if you're suggesting that development delays, meaning um, you're trying to, I guess, put more into it or develop this, you know, disruptive technology. Um, you want to get to the point where you say, hey, I want to test these 5 things, and could be more than one proof of concept because you can build on your proof of concept. The first thing is, make the LED light up. Okay, good. Next time is make it, play an audio. Next thing is make it talk to me. That could be in stages for your proof of concept. Part of that is understanding what are you trying to get to as your final product. And you have to basically stop design. Here's when I say, here's where I stop my design because my everything else is going to go to my phase two. Not understanding that, you're going to try to build something perfect that will never get sent out to market. So perfect is the enemy of good enough. You have to get it good enough,
Mm-hmm.
get it out there, get the people working, get it reliable. Yes. And here's the feature set that if we do it right, we can put hooks into it. For example, the Duratec. If Chris had turned the back there, there's a panel on there that says, "Hey, that's my extended battery pack. That's my GPS. That's my module." So when
Yeah.
we hit that, we said, "Hey, here's our product to get it out there and get it working, but here's our hooks to all these other feature sets that we haven't fully developed yet, but we know it's coming." So
Mm-hmm.
if you know what you want to do, and say, "This is where we want to get to market," what is your core that you want to get to as your proof of concept to get it to market first?
Yeah, I think it would even accelerate development because you're iterating on that proof of concept and you're not worried about, like, well, when you have something like this, you're not worrying about what's the mechanical enclosure need to be yet. And then you can add things onto this as you develop and test things without, like, oh, it's not going to fit anymore. Oops, we needed a bigger battery, things like that. All right. Do you make intros for your clients to potential customers of the solutions? Yes, actually, that is one of the features of the studio is that, we do have a wide network of clients, and sometimes the startup has built a product that, we know that that company might find use of, or they're using the product from that company. We had that happen in batch one of the studio where they were using a Moverio headset from Epson. Well, it turned out we already had been doing a lot of work for Epson, including on the Moverio, so we were able to make that introduction. So that does happen. Let's see here. Being based in Europe, would it be a good idea to get programmers, developers, etc., for example, the Philippines, considering they are cheaper? Well, I mean, if you have experience managing, uh, developers across cultures, I think that's something that startups um, don't understand. The resources may be cheaper, but can you manage them? Can you evaluate them? Can you coordinate them? And do you understand the cultural differences of when they nod their head, are they saying yes, or are they just agreeing with what you said? And so, using a client like us or others that are used to working in, we have resources in Lithuania, Poland, Georgia, 22 different countries, Guadalajara, Mexico, and so we're able to leverage the top talent across the U.S. So um, can you hire someone cheaper? Sure, you can always do that, but don't underestimate the coordination. Um, Also, make sure you're paying attention to IP protection in those cases, right? How do you test a product like a mobile app, um, like to prove revenue generation models in a way to market? Um, I think this is more like getting that MVP. It's not maybe proof of concept, right? So you need to have a minimal viable product and then get it out into the app store and then testing various revenue models, right? That's what I would say if it's a mobile app, and understanding software as a service and what the mobile different advertising and revenue models are for that. But that wouldn't be at a POC stage. That would be more what I would think is like an MVP stage.
Hmm.
So you're not going to put your proof of concept into the app store. Will you be able to review this webinar again? Damon did answer that. Yes, immediately after this is over, you'll be able to watch it again with the same link that you used to come here today. Um, okay, somebody I know, I guess. All right, Chris. We've talked a few times about my construction software we're using to run my business. How many more subscribers, clients would you recommend to feel good about a POC? Well, I think, Jacob, maybe let's talk that offline, and I can, understand a little bit more about how many you do have and what kind of revenue model you need in order to go to that proof of concept. So send me an email. Or reach out at that hello@softeq.com, and we'll get the right team in place. And I'm happy to talk to you directly. Last one for today, and then we'll wrap up. Does Softeq assist with capital raise? In some cases, yes. So we have a venture fund that we're taking like 3% of startups to come to Softeq, and then but don't just give them money. We have them go through our venture studio program, where we mentor them for 3 or 4 months, and then we pair them with our engineers to help them get their proof of concept or MVP built or their hardware software more enterprise ready. So the short answer is yes, although we still have to qualify. And At the moment, we don't have a cohort that's open because the fund is now in a fundraising phase again. But there is if you go to softeq.com/vs for Venture Studio, you can apply. And you can see some of the questions that we're asking, and you can get in the queue of potential startups that we choose from. So I think that's it. We got through it in 40 minutes or so. Not too bad. Uh, Hope it was interesting. If you want to hear more about going from this phase to production, that's on April 22nd. If you have an idea or you want to do a discovery phase or brainstorming or just want to kind of flesh out your thoughts, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to continue the discussion. So thanks for joining us today. And everyone have a great week. And thanks, Phu.
Great week.
Mm.